Welcome to the High Performance Hockey Podcast. Today, we're joined by Associate Athletic Director and Director of Athletic Performance at Quinnipiac University, Coach Brijesh Patel. Coach Patel is a speaker, consultant, and performance coach at Quinnipiac University. Coach Patel has engineered the strength and conditioning department from scratch, instilling in it his philosophy and approach in creating an amazing culture within the department and the athletes in which he serves. Coach Patel oversees the strength and conditioning development for all 21 varsity sports at Quinnipiac. He works primarily with men's and women's basketball and men's and women's ice hockey. Today we discuss on the first half of our chat this idea of building culture, the culture that he has built at Quinnipiac University, a culture around love, accountability, and education. And this fantastic talk. The second half of our interview, we speak about a lecture that Coach Patel gave on the CoachTube site entitled Understanding Fascia and Its Role in Performance. Fantastic lecture. And we speak about the physiology behind fascia, why it's important to train, and then a pragmatic approach on how he uses it daily training as hockey players. It's a fantastic chat. Welcome to the podcast. Welcome to the podcast, Brijesh. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks, Anthony. I'm glad to be here.
Really excited to have you on. I've long admired your work. Although we've only had beer several times, we've communicated back and forth at length, and I always value your opinion. For those who don't know, you oversee literally 21 varsity sports at Quinnipiac University. You've been there since 2008, so you're literally up on 14 years at the university. That's amazing in and of itself. Yeah. Give us an idea of a day in the life for you. I would imagine you're drinking water through a fire hose here at this point.
No, it's I'll tell you what, I've been here for 14 years and my administration has been really great about how my position was initially set up. I did come on board as the first full-time strength and conditioning coach here. And they told me flat out, like initially, your responsibility is to best serve the basketball and hockey programs because they are tier 1 sports and they were going to help bring up the national profile of our school. And then my next responsibility was to try to help serve the other teams as best I could. And to be able to do that, I was able to bring on interns and bring on volunteers, which helped really to serve all of our other teams on campus. And eventually they progressed into full-time positions. And I'm fortunate now that it started with just me. And now I've got a staff of 4 full-time staff, like myself and 3 others included. We've got an internship program now. I did have a GA at one time. Hopefully we'll be able to get that person back too. But I've been able to create a program that allows each one of our members on staff to have maybe 4 teams, 5 at the most.
Wow.
And so that's a pretty good workload in terms of being able to manage a work-life balance. And that's one thing I'm really fortunate to be able to have, is to have a really good work-life balance. I'm able to bring my kids to school every single day.
Oh, that's fantastic.
I have dinner at home nearly every single day, except for when we're in season. Like those days are a little bit longer and a little bit tougher, but for the most part, like my days are nice. Like the other thing that Quinnipiac does is we carve out blocks of time throughout the day that are strictly for training and for practicing. So for example, our women's basketball team, our training block is from 9 to 12. Okay. So everything they'll do from whether it be the weight room or on court is from 9 a.m. to 12. Then our men's hockey is from 11 to 2. And then men's basketball and women's hockey goes 2 to 5. So the bulk of my day is going to be from 9 to 5, wow, which is uncommon at the strength conditioning level. You know what I mean? And especially in the collegiate setting. And my assistants, sometimes they'll have some teams at 7 a.m., rarely 6 a.m. So, but for the most part, we've got really good work-life balances. And I encourage my staff to be able to have that too. So when I come in, I'm able to get in. I get situated with whatever I need to do. But I've been here for 14 years, and I've got systems in place and processes in place where our student athletes can essentially run themselves. And that's what I tell them. Listen, I'm not going to hold your hand. That's the way we run our program. I'm not going to hold your hand and tell you, you need to do this, you need to do this, you need to do this. Here's your program. I will teach you how to read it. Here's our warm-ups. Here's how you read the sheet. I will help you with technique or whatever questions you may have. But if you have to make up session, you want to do something else extra, like our kids know how to train. And then the other thing too is when we have newcomers come into our program, I tell our upperclassmen, like, it's your responsibility to help guide them. Like, one day I'm not going to be there for you. You've got to be able to figure out how to have some ownership within your journey and your development process so that you understand how to take care of yourself. And these are conversations I have with recruits. When they come on campus, I tell them straight out what our philosophy is, how we do things. And I tell them, like, one of my objectives is to teach you how to be healthy for the rest of your life, not just for the 4 years that you're an athlete. Like,
Sure.
we're teaching you the tools on how to take care of yourself for the rest of your life. And not just physical training, but also behavioral things too.
And I think that builds your leadership culture too with your upperclassmen, right? I mean, essentially, you've got coaching's a lot like parenting in ways, right? At a young age, you have a directive approach. And at an older age, you might lose that person with that directive approach. It's a cooperative approach. And that approach might now be put on your upperclassmen where they get responsibility, they feel ownership. And as a consequence, you got a culture there that's self-sufficient.
And that's exactly it. And then it's really nice to be able to see, because there's moments when I can step back and I can just observe, and then really help our upperclassmen become leaders. And I tell this to recruits too, is you can learn how to develop leadership qualities within the weight room.
Oh.
I mean, because there's no depth chart in here. Everybody's the same. There's no playing time that's going to be earned and lost within the weight room. Like, this is an environment where you can, if you're on the fifth line, like, your voice is going to be just as impactful if you're in the first D pair. Like, our third string goalie has just as much energy, enthusiasm, and the quality of his work is going to matter just as much as our starting goalie. Like, there's no difference there.
Another thing that really struck me in your kind of your explanation here of your model, I had an opportunity to speak with Matt Shaw, University of Denver, and it sounds like their model is very similar in a few ways. They have responsibilities for several teams. They're not spread way thin, right? So for you, men's, women's basketball, men's ice hockey, correct? Am I right?
Women's ice hockey.
Oh, and women's. Okay, so essentially, you're able to get a lot of good quality touch points as opposed to having a schedule that's just spread too thin in terms and measures of workload. Is that accurate?
Yeah, and it spreads the coach thin, but also minimize the impact that you can have upon every single individual that you're able to work with, right? It's college training conditioning is unique because you get to see the student athletes year round. You get to see them in the preseason, you get to see them in season, you get to see them in off season, you get to see them on good days, you get to see them on bad days, you get to see them in great moments and in poor moments, and you can really develop a relationship. And when you have too many teams to work with, you're not able to see everybody every single day. Then you don't get to know them as an individual where you can help coach them and help guide them as best as you can. The opposite end of the spectrum, the job I was at previously was at the College of the Holy Cross. And because we only had 2 full-time staff members, I had 14 teams. So when I had 14 teams, it was nearly impossible to have the same level of relationship that you could with every single person. And when you don't have that relationship, as well as I do, then the impact that you have is going to be somewhat minimized.
100%. Matter of fact, I think that's exactly what we do as coaches, right? I mean, obviously get strong, get fast, but we build culture. I always say coaching is a lot like gardening. Gardeners don't grow flowers. They create an environment for flowers to grow. They're literally building brick by brick culture. Another thing that really struck me, and I wanted to ask how you do this, it says each student athlete is given his or her own individualized program. So is it a collective individualized approach, team by team? Meaning, you've got your big rocks, right? Someone's got an ankle restriction, or hey, someone's coming off a shoulder. We're not starting over from the drawing board. In this environment, in this model you have, it's collectively individualized within that group. Am I accurate?
Yeah, no, that's a great way to put it. Like, the way we look at it is when we train and we do a team training session, it is very much run like practice, right?
Okay.
And if you're going to run a hockey practice, you're going to run a soccer practice, basketball practice, the majority of what you do is going to be pretty much the same.
Yep.
Right. Everybody's going to go through the same drills, whatever it might be. We got to run through the same system. So when we train, we typically train together as a team. So when we're together, we'll do our core training, plyos, speed work, whatever we're going to do within that day.
Yep.
The things that become individualized are going to be based on their assessment. So if somebody has a certain movement restriction, somebody has a positional restriction, Like our goalies, for example, we don't squat them for any from primary lower body movement. We'll do a hinge or a deadlift variation. So it might be a biomechanical individualization for them.
Sure.
If they have an inability to perform a certain movement because of an injury, and a movement, it can get progressed or regressed based on what they need. So it becomes individualized, again, biomechanically. And then the loads are going to become individualized too, based on what their actual capacity is to be able to perform a certain exercise.
Gotcha.
Then what we tell them too is within our culture, we want them to create a culture of where extra is encouraged, right? Like if we tell them flat out, like if you go to practice, you come to lift, that's like the bare minimum, right? If you do the bare minimum, that's going to equate to average, right?
Sure.
If you want to become exceptional, it's those moments in time when you invest a little bit more, whether it be your physical development, your technical development, your mental development. That's when you start to become exceptional, is when you start to do those extra things. And so when we talk about extra, that's all individualized.
Yeah.
So based on our testing and our assessments, we can say, hey, if you're not getting enough ice time, you need to do extra conditioning. That's your extra work.
Mm-hmm.
If you are lacking in your ability to produce force at a higher rate, like maybe your extra work is going to be plyos and maybe some sprint work.
Sure.
If your limitation is strength work, then we're going to maybe focus on that. If yours is like you've got shoulder pain, then your individualization is going to be this extra shoulder work. So that's where we individualize.
Which again, I think it really adds to the buy-in of the athlete, right? So speaking of culture, I wanted to piggyback this question. Overall, from a cultural standpoint, we talked about you getting the upperclassmen involved. We talked about you teaching and not so much looking over someone's shoulder all the time, telling what to do. It's a self-sustained environment. From a cultural standpoint, is this something that you talk about year over year? Is it core competencies? Is it a mission statement that you talk about with the athletes? And the other question I have is, do you meet with skill coaches, whether it's the hockey team, to talk about this culture? Is this something totally separate from the weight room in terms of how you do that? And the reason I say that, Brijesh, because I'm going to give you a pump in your tires, but first of all, I think you're a brilliant guy. You have such a great personality. And every time I see something written in social media about former players, like the word is not, I had a great time at Quinnipiac. It's, I loved Coach Patel. I've worked in a couple of camps, NHL development camps, where there's former Quinnipiac players. And the word's not like, hey, it was a great time. I loved Coach. So how do you create that? That's a huge compliment.
Oh, thank you for sharing that. Honestly, I think it comes down to my values and my beliefs. And that's what culture is. Culture is what is your belief system? What is your value system? And if it's important to you, then you've got to work for it each and every single day. It's not something that's just a buzzword that you do. Oh, it's the off season, we're going to work on our culture. And like, it doesn't work that way. Like your culture has to be about everything that you do. And I've said this to our student athletes before, is like, whatever you value, you're going to work towards. So if you value these things, then you're going to work towards it. If you value, like in this example, if you value getting money from your parents, guess what? You're going to figure out a way to get money from your parents. If you value your nutrition, then you're probably going to, or you value your body composition, you're going to value nutrition. You're going to value those types of things. So when it comes to culture, it's our values and our philosophy, and it's our belief system, all those types of things. And through my time with the different experiences I've had, I've developed a philosophy where it's based around 3 goals. Like number 1, we're going to reduce the chance of injury, because you can't play if you're hurt. Number 2, we're going to make you a better athlete. So we're going to work on all parameters of sport performance to help you become a better athlete. And then third thing is we're going to educate you, because we want to teach you why we're asking you to do what we're asking you to do. We want you to understand it. I'm not the type of coach who says, just do this because I said so. I want you to understand why. And when you can understand why, now you're going to invest more effort. And when you invest more effort, you're going to yield way more on the return. And so it's a very general and broad-based philosophy, but allows my staff members to be able to use that in any which way that they see fit, and based on their experiences and based on their belief systems, to be able to best design the program for whatever team they're going to be able to work with. But when it comes down to it, like if you want to get increase somebody's lower body strength, the methods aren't going to change if you're a basketball player or a hockey player.
Sure.
Right. It's not going to matter if you're a soccer player. You may choose a different exercise.
Sure.
But the core principles are going to be the same. You want to improve somebody's ability to accelerate, it's not going to be that much different.
Yeah.
So that's why I say and try to improve general athleticism. And then the also thing, like we've got to keep our athletes healthy, and we've got to keep them available to be able to practice at a high level. So when a student athlete comes on campus, we have an orientation with them. So the first thing that they do when I meet with them is we go through our philosophy. I've got a page printout, goes over our mission statement. It has our vision statement. I tell them flat out, this is what my responsibility is to you guys. My job is to help support you to become the best version of yourself. There's going to be times you may not like me. There's going to be times that I'm going to push you, but I'm going to be upfront and honest, and I expect honesty in return. So those are the things we talk about. That we talk about our non-negotiables, right? Which is basically helps build our culture, which is accountability, respect, and work ethic. I'm going to hold you to the highest standard possible. I expect you to hold yourself to the highest standard possible. You not only have to hold yourself to a high standard, your teammates are going to hold you to that same standard as well. And if they don't, then I'm going to let them know. The second thing is respect. You're going to respect the facilities you get to train in, respect your teammates, respect your bodies. I'm going to teach you how to take care of your body. And the last thing is work ethic. Like, good things happen to people who work hard. So I want you to understand those types of values. And if you don't do those things, I'm going to let you know about it.
Sure.
And so I try to keep it simple from that standpoint, from in terms of philosophy or culture. And then how we implement it, we're very organized, we're efficient, and we're disciplined. A lot of things in 3, because I don't think you can think in very many other things outside of 3. It helps keep things concise.
Yep.
But like you asked before, so in day 1, they're told all of this. My first day, when I met with the coaches that I get to work with, I told them the same thing. I told them, like, this is how I'm going to run the room. These are non-negotiables. This is how we're going to accomplish it. And they're like, okay. So
great.
They, fortunately, for the most part, like all of our coaches, give us full support.
Yep.
Allow us to do those things. So it's not one of those things that I have to constantly meet with our coaches and skill coaches about. Like, they understand, like, hey, this is how we do things. And being here 14 years, I've seen how we do things in here starts to carry over in the actual field of competition.
Yeah.
Like, wherever they start to, because they start to understand and they start to value and they start to believe it.
100%.
And that goes back into the process of educating them and teaching them, hey, this is why we do it this way. This is why we count together. This is why we do these things together. This is why you got to go through the line. This is why we start behind the line. This is why you have to do it this way. And because if you can justify it, the kids will listen to you.
Absolutely.
And as long as you're consistent and you're honest, I think that's the thing is some coaches, if they're dishonest, they're going to lose, they're not going to earn trust. And then things aren't going to work out for them, and cultures start to break then.
Sure. Sure.
So I know you asked a lot of things. Is that kind of,
yeah. Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. It answered it well. I want to pivot for a second. I wanted to talk with you more now about an educational presentation that you gave. I think it's absolutely fantastic. It's on the Coach Tube website, and I'll link that to the show notes. Understanding fascia and its role in performance. To give the listener here, it's about a 45-minute presentation. Fantastic, really, really deep. What I loved about the presentation, Brijesh, like what you always do a great job of, it's extremely well organized in the fact that it goes into detail about the physiology of fascia. And then it goes into pragmatic application, which I really appreciate. One without the other, to me, I get lost. And it goes into detail. Again, we'll link it to the show notes. But prior to you speaking about the role of fascia, you used a great analogy. And I wanted to ask a general question. You said plants versus machines. And I don't know, you were using this to describe the human body, right? Plants versus machines. And I think a lot of times we view the human body, I say I'm pointing the thumb myself, from a reductionist standpoint, right? I'm like clouds and clocks. One's complicated, one's complex. I love this analogy. Could you expand upon it for me as to the role and are we losing something in undergraduate education? Is it something that I was taught, or hey, do we just need to change the mindset altogether?
Yeah, it's you know what it is. It's been a process that's happened for a long period of time, and I think it's something that Western education or Western thought has kind of created, right? And
Okay.
I'm not saying this in a bad way. Please don't take this in a bad or negative way. It's just a different way.
Sure.
Right? When, like, me being Indian and understanding Asian culture and Indian culture growing up, I was always taught, like, the way you thought mattered. Right? The way you thought about things mattered. Like your perspectives, your outlooks, they all mattered towards everything. And Granted, that made things much more complex to be able to understand. And I didn't understand it when I was young. But when I started going to school, everything had to be explained. Everything had to be explained in terms of like, well, this works because of this. This works because of this. This works because of this. Okay, that's great. But what about like when you integrate everything together? Does it work the same exact way?
Sure.
Like the way we talk about or like performance, right? Performance isn't completely isolated. That happens in one event. Oh, like, oh my God, like I had the best performance of my life. Okay, that's great. But there's a lot of other things before that led up to that moment that allowed you to be able to perform that certain way. Your nutrition mattered, your sleep mattered, your mindset mattered. The things in your life, like maybe you had a great moment with your parents that day or a great moment with your significant other, like all those things add up for you being able to perform the way it can. Like just because I think we're starting to understand this, and a lot of really good professionals that are educated and that have a really good ability to look at things from different perspectives, understand too, okay, your knee hurts. Your knee hurts. It's not because it's an isolated issue with your knee. Maybe it's something that's going on with your fascia or tissue that's elsewhere in your body, or maybe because you blocked a shot off your left ankle and you couldn't stride as much with your left foot. You've put more load on top of your right leg. And so now your knee's pissed off because it's being forced to overwork a little bit more. You know what I mean?
Absolutely.
And so
Absolutely.
I think that's the way I think we're taught to think in undergrad education, to think of a parts versus a system approach because it's easier to explain. It's easier
Sure.
to put into a book. Like it's hard to explain, oh my God, like you had 10 glasses of water yesterday and you didn't have any inflammatory foods. And then your sleep score was over 90%. And then you perform better.
Sure.
And you got 100 on a test. Like all those things go into you feeling really good.
Yeah. And let alone, the technical, tactical, psychological, like these are just 100%. I couldn't agree with you more on that. You also talk about, before you dive into the fascial discussion, position. Educate the listener. Why is position important? Why does it matter?
Yeah. So when I talk about position, right, this is posture is another term, right?
Yep.
Like people, you can use posture, you can use positions. Position is everything, right? Because if you can't get into the right positions to be able to reduce force, then how can you apply force? And that's what we ultimately trying to do. Is we have a movement-based approach to the way we train. Athletes need to be able to move. We need to be able to move efficiently so that we can ask our athletes to be able to be at the best that they can be to perform their technical and tactical skills.
Sure.
If we can't get into the right positions to be able to reduce and absorb force, then we're limiting our efficiency and our effectiveness to be able to apply our skills at the highest power outputs that they need to be able to perform them to be able to last longest or be able to be at their best.
Sure.
So position is critical. And yes, can you still perform in spite of great position? Absolutely. People do it all the time.
All the time.
But what we're trying to do is optimize their efficiency so that they can perform with a reduced cost of energy, so they have more energy to be able to perform their skills harder, faster, and longer.
That's a beautiful answer. I think a great analogy I got back in the day from Jimmy Snyder. He said it's the equivalent of riding a bike with a rusty bike chain, right? You might be able to get over the finish line, but you're going to do so less efficiently. I want to piggyback that question, and I'm not asking a loaded question, but I'm just curious as your thought process before we dive a little bit deeper into fascia. This position argument, I mean, does it start at the pelvis? Are we looking from a position standpoint more central to peripheral in terms of measures of that position? I know we look at like DNS and PRI and these concepts, and to me, and again, I'm putting this in my own words, are we trying to solve the same problem with a different lens? Whether it's the DNS, open scissor posture, or PRI, left AIC, PEC. Does that make, are you following me?
Yeah.
Does it start at the pelvis, or do we not know?
I don't know. I think feet are everything. Honestly, I think everything starts with the ground, and everything starts with how we interact with the ground, and what can we feel the ground with our feet, and if our receptors in our feet can give information back up the chain, back to our brain to be able to position things optimally. I mean, our position is going to change every time we start to move. Sure. All you're trying to do is be able to optimize your tension so that you can be able to coordinate the right joints, provide the right amount of stability at the right time so we can produce the amount of force that's needed to move us in whatever direction that we need to. So I'm a foot guy. Like, I think everything starts with the feet. And when I was in school, I was fortunate enough, like we had a physical therapist teacher, Dave Tiberio, and Dave Tiberio, I don't know if you know the name or not, but he was Gary Gray's right-hand man. So if you
Wow.
know Gary Gray,
Yep.
like Dave Tiberio was with him, like in all those discussions. And I remember he spoke to us when I was at UConn to our strength staff. He would always say Gary is a butt guy, and he would always Dave was a foot guy. So Dave thought everything started with the foot, and they were the first guys to talk about the kinetic chain and how things would start to work. And Gary said everything started at the butt. And so you could be a pelvis guy, you could be a foot guy, but I mean it's one and the same. It's whatever approach you decide to use that helps you get to Rome, right? There's many paths to Rome, right? You could approach things with an RPR lens, a PRI lens, a DNS lens, a powerlifting lens, a movement-based approach lens, like whatever it is, they're all lenses, and they're all different tools within your toolbox. And the more tools that you have, the better you, well, sometimes you get confused, but sometimes the way I look at it, it just allows you to be able to solve different problems.
Absolutely.
And that's all there are. They're just different ways to be able to help your clientele or help your athlete feel better or move better. That's really it. If you can get them to feel better, then you're going to get them to move better. And if you can get them to move better, hopefully you get them to perform better.
Fantastic. Getting
I
into
don't know if that answers your question.
No, it does.
I think it depends on whatever you're comfortable doing, right? So if all you know is PRI, you're going to try to PRI everybody. You're going to look at everything from that lens.
Yep.
Now, if you've taken maybe an RPR course or a DNS course, now you're going to be like, oh, or FRC, like that's going to give you another different perspective on what you may need to do. Or ELDOA, like that's going to give you a different approach to solve that problem.
Absolutely.
And everything comes down to movement, right? Like that's all we're trying to do is we're looking to enhance their ability to move much more efficiently.
Absolutely. Fascia. What is it? What's it made out of? Why is it important?
I think it's important. I don't know if everybody thinks it's important. I think it's something that we should be aware of because it's there, right? So fascia, and what we're learning now too is that it's almost like another system within the body. Just like you have your cardiovascular system, you have your endocrine system, you have your cardiovascular, your muscular system, your skeletal system. Like you have a fascial system too. And it's predominantly made up of water and collagen, right? And with the best way to describe it too, it's almost like it acts like a hydraulic pressure, like it kind of contains your entire body together. So it envelops and surrounds everything. And it's surrounded with liquid gels. And it's not just one layer that wraps your whole body together underneath your layer of skin. You also have fascia that interweaves and goes in between each individual muscular fiber. It's going to go in and around organs. Like it's this matrixy web of collagen and fluids that surrounds everything.
Sure.
And you've got different layers of it too. And why it's important is because I think the thing that a lot of people don't understand is like when they first do dissections, they get everything in the book is they just like cut it away. Right. But what they've started to realize too is that it's very sensory rich, right? There's a lot of proprioceptors that are embedded within your fascial system. And why is that important? Why are your proprioceptors important? Because it gives information back to your brain.
Sure.
And that's what that your brain coordinates movement. And so every time you move and every time you stretch and every time you accept pressure, like those proprioceptors are going to get stimulated, and they're going to either get stimulated by pressure or stimulated by length. And it's going to give information back to our brain on how to coordinate our movement so we can be efficient. We can efficiently move through our environment, and which is what I said before. So if your goal is to help your athletes move better, fascia is something that you probably should look at. And I also too want to say, like, it's almost impossible to just simply train your fascia by itself, right? It's not something, oh, I'm going to do a fascial program. Like there's no way you're going to do that. Like it's just something, or you're going to do a fascial day like that. Shit doesn't work that way. Like
we're talking about reductionist. We just talked about the reductionism, right? Yeah, it ain't going to happen that way.
Exactly. Right. It's something that works together with your muscular system, with your skeletal system, with your nervous system, with your cardiovascular system. Just be aware of the properties that it has and how what you do directly can impact and maybe take a look at what you do and how you can make things a little bit better within your own training.
Another quote that you had in this continuing education course: fascia is an obstacle to position. I love that. I mean, it's an obstacle to position depending on how you use it, right? I would imagine I'm putting words in your mouth, but I'd like you to expand on this. You know, this could be overuse, it could be previous injury, it could be a byproduct of sport. But could you go into a little bit more detail? Why is fascia an obstacle to position? And I want to be specific here. If you would be so kind enough to use a sport, could you use a sport of hockey, for example, of what you may see with your players?
Yeah. So when I see fascia as an obstacle position is obviously right. We want to get into the best position that we can for, let's say, a stride, right? We want or support phase of skating. Like if we want to be able to get into hip flexion, optimally that occurs primarily at the femur and not necessarily any kind of extra pelvic motion. We want to be able to have the optimal amount of knee flexion and dorsiflexion so that we can load our posterior chain and our quads and our lower leg musculature to be able to provide the strongest push that we can. Now, if we have a fascial restriction at the ankle, a fascial restriction at the knee, or a fascial restriction at the hip that doesn't allow those positions to be maximized, then we're limiting the force production and ultimately maybe the skating potential of that athlete.
Sure.
And so those fascial restrictions occur. It can occur from poor training. It can occur from poor lack of movement. It can occur from a injury that was never rehabbed correctly. An issue you may have is you might have scar tissue. Like a scar tissue is a fascial issue that can restrict your ability to maybe get optimal dorsiflexion. And so if you want to enhance your ability to skate, then maybe you need to work on that. Maybe that's a limiting factor for you to be able to get in the right position. So maybe not just hammering the squat position or hammering that position without looking at other types of things, but fascia is something that we got to be able to look at to understand why somebody might not be able to get into the right position.
Just from your experience, and I want to go off the record here regarding questions. From your experience, number one, do you, if at all, is it an eyeball test? I mean, is there a pre and post measure to see if you've made tangible differences? And how long will those differences last? Or is it just something that, hey, Anthony, we feel this is important, we're going to do it every day, and as a consequence of repetition over repetition, we feel we've checked that box off, if that makes sense?
Yeah, it's pretty much it's going to be the latter approach, right?
Okay.
It's not something where I don't have the manpower, the time to be able to put everybody on a table and goniometer them and do these assessments like some professionals do, which is outstanding. That's just not in my wheelhouse, nor is it in my ways of maximizing the limited time I have with everybody. So a lot of it, what we'll do is we'll do movement assessments.
Okay.
We do something that I've adopted over the last, I think, year and a half. It's called the athletic ability assessment. I can't remember where I got it from, but it was somewhere in England. I think they did a paper on it. They basically compared it to the FMS and said that there wasn't enough load in the FMS. It wasn't the same type of results that you're going to be able to see with an athlete. And so the load is just, we do a barbell overhead squat. We'll do a barbell walking lunge. We'll do a single leg squat test. We'll do push-ups. We'll do pull-ups. We'll do a plank, and we'll do a side plank. And then we'll do a single leg forward hop and land, and then a lateral bound. So then we can kind of see how they move with a little bit of load on them versus just a deep squat or a hurdle step or an inline lunge, because load changes things. And so we want to be able to understand how they can move with a little bit of load. How long can they hold position for, whether it be a plank or a side plank? How can they absorb force? How do they move ballistically versus just dynamically, like with a jump or a hop and land? And then we just get an idea of how they can move. And then we start to, it's not a grenade approach, but I guess you can call it that way, is we'll put everybody in the same bucket. And when we do our prep work before every single session, we'll either do some RPR or we'll do some fascial stretches. And then we integrate some fascial stretches into our training program. And then when we finish, or if somebody's extra work might be flexibility work or more recovering, we have stretches that you've done for years and other people have done for years, but they're a little bit more driven towards our fascia.
Gotcha.
You know? Yep. And that could lead probably in the next thing too, but
yeah,
that's the approach that we would take.
Absolutely. You talked about some downstream effects of fascial impairment, specifically the lymph system. Could you educate the listeners on the lymph system and then how adhesion or impairment from a fascial standpoint might impair that system?
Sure. The lymphatic system is, I'll be honest, like I didn't know very much about the lymphatic system And it was something I don't really remember from my undergraduate days, but it's basically, it's the way I describe it to our athletes when I teach them about it. It's like, it's our plumbing system, right? It's our system that moves fluids throughout our body. When we say fluids, primarily blood, water, any other kind of fluids that we're going to have. And when we have a fascial restriction in one area, that can reduce the flow of blood and fluids through that area. And the other thing to understand too is we also have nerves embedded within our lymphatic system. And so if we've got a certain area of our body, like maybe you got a shoulder contusion, right? From hitting the boards or hitting the ice, and now you've got a lack of movement in your arm. Like you could have decreased circulation that's going to happen through there.
Sure.
And that may limit the effectiveness of those nerves, but also the proprioceptors information getting sent back to our brain. And sometimes we may have a little bit of pooling of some circulation there, right? And so our lymph is going to start to have some pockets within our body that are going to be more swampy instead of like a clean river that's flowing smoothly. And
Sure.
that's kind of what we want our fluid system to be like, and our plumbing system to be like, is very like an open river, right? That's running smoothly throughout our body. And fascia sometimes, because if we create densifications or restrictions, can create little restrictions to our lymphatic system and limit the flow of fluids efficiently throughout our body. And if we limit that flow, then it's going to ultimately create a little bit more inflammatory response. We're going to get more inflammation, and we're going to lay down more collagen because we're not moving.
Sure.
Right. And that can cause more restriction. So it's almost like a cascadey type effect. It's funny, like our body's going to lay down collagen constantly, right? It's going to lay down collagen in response to stress, but also lays down collagen in response to lack of movement as well too.
Sure.
And this has been shown. I remember reading that people with low back pain will lay down more fascia as a protective mechanism through their lumbar spine to reduce movement. So It's almost like it works both ways.
Or thinking about
getting
scar
tissue is
a cast off, right? Where you're literally trying to unlock your arm. You've laid that fascia down in a fixed position for, who
knows how 6 weeks or whatever. So it's embedded, right? So
sure.
You've got to do something to move that joint. And I think more and more research is coming out now. Like you sprain an ankle, you get hurt. What do you want to do? You want to move, right?
Absolutely.
You want to move. And so movement is key for lymphatic system, but also for our fascial system too.
I love it. Training the fascia. This idea of plastic properties. You went into detail a little bit in the video and the presentation about this idea of taffy versus a rubber band. Could you explain that analogy to the listeners?
Sure. So fascia has elastic properties, but also has plastic properties too. And so when you stretch a plastic substance and you hold it for a length of time, it's going to remain in that new shape. Whereas if you quickly stretch something and you don't hold it, it's going to snap back. Fascia has that unique as both properties, which are very unique. If you pull taffy and you hold it for a minute, it's going to stay stretched out. But if a rubber band, it's going to snap back. So the collagen in the fascia gives it this taffy-like quality, and repeated stretching and holding can help to remodel it. Now, people are going to say, well, why do you want it to be stretchy, right? Don't you just want to be elastic all the time? Remember what I said before is our fascia is going to respond to stress or stretch. We want to be able to stretch it so that we can get effective communication back to our brain, to our nervous system too. Also, we're trying to remove any kind of restrictions that we may have through our fascial chain. And this goes back to that reductionist approach. Like we don't want to think of, I'm just stretching our quad.
Sure.
We're not just doing a quad stretch. We might be doing an anterior frontline stretch. And so to do that, we've got to effectively tension everything from our toes to our fingertips. And so where you might feel more of a quad stretch, I might feel more of a shoulder stretch, because maybe that's where my restrictions lay within that line. And if I can open up and I can get better stretch there, that's going to help my quad function better too, because it's all a chain reaction.
Absolutely.
Does that help?
It does. It helps a lot. I love this idea here, and I'd like you to go into detail. So I don't want to give the whole overview, but your 3-step approach in terms and measures of how you train the fascia, specifically if you could give us an example or examples in hockey. I know it might not make a big difference sport by sport. Maybe you say, Anthony, it's more of a blanket approach, but these pillars in your program: fascial preparation, load, and explode. Could we please start by speaking more about the fascial preparation, how you target areas, this first quote unquote phase or approach?
Yeah. So the ways you're going to be able to impact your fascia primarily are going to be through compression and through traction. Those are the ways that we're going to try to stimulate those receptors that are embedded within our fascial system. And so compression work, I think everybody does a good job with, right? Everybody knows that foam rolling is going to be good for your fascial system. Using lacrosse balls, using ART, grass, and whatever it may be, Theraguns, right? Everybody does tons of compression work. But very rarely do I think we implement a lot of work for our traction, right? And traction is stretching. That's probably the best way I'm going to be able to describe it. And through my readings and through my understanding, I'm by no means an expert in ELDOA. I've gotten a lot of different things from ELDOA, Stretch to Win by the Fredericks. But those kinds of principles of creating tension from our fingertips to our toes and creating elongation, I think is how we create better traction through our fascial system. And that's how we're going to impact our fascial system, is through traction. So the best analogy I can give you is let me, if I have a shirt or a rope, right? That's the analogy I give our athletes all the time, right? If I do, say, a pigeon stretch, right? Something for a posterior capsule. If I just get into that position, all I'm doing is I'm creating a stretch within that certain area. But when I let go, it's going to be a little bunched up. If I want to create better length through the entire line, I have to create tension at both ends, right? And so for that to happen, I've got to create tension through entire lines, whether that require a reaching, dorsiflexion, plantar flexion, inversion, eversion. We've got to be able to elongate and create tension through an entire fascial line. And some of those concepts are based in FRC as well, too, being able to understand how to create tension through our entire body to be able to get better length at the target joint that you want.
I saw that in the video talking about, I think it was a stretch where you were literally reaching with the palms. That's the idea of stretching that towel from essentially toenail to fingernail, right?
Yeah. Yeah. So, and it's funny because like everybody's done, like, right, hockey especially, right? They've done hip flexor stretches.
Yeah.
And so what we'll do is like a classic, half kneel hip flexor stretch. We will tell them, all right, so now get in that position. Now reach your hands as far forward as you can. And so now what the reach does, like if you understand PRI, what is it? Like, it stacks your rib cage over your pelvis.
Exactly.
Right? You're gonna get scapular protraction. You're gonna extend your wrist, and then you're gonna press your shin into the ground. You're gonna plantar flex your ankle, and you're gonna press that ankle into the ground. Now you've created tension, toes to fingertips, and they're like, wow, that's way different.
Totally different. And we haven't done that in the past. So it was a huge aha moment. The way you explained it now to me, just taking that concept with PRI, it's exactly what you want. Internal rotation of the ribs, zone of apposition, take it posterior pelvic. I mean, you can get all that just with that reach. Brijesh, is that ELDOA? Is that the actual method? ELDOA, is that it? Like, I know there's a bunch of different stretches, et cetera, but that falls under the ELDOA umbrella.
I believe so. So ELDOA is pretty much targeted primarily towards your spine.
Okay.
Right. And like it's I forget the exact term of what ELDOA stands for, but it's French. Okay. And it's created by this guy Guy Voyer, but targeted towards creating more space or more traction through your spine. And this makes so much sense too. If our vertebrae are compressed over time due to sitting and poor postures and everything that we do, like what runs through our spinal column, right? And so that's going to impact the nerves, and that's going to impact all the information that's going to send back out from our brain. If we want, that's what chiropractic is based in too, is we want to be able to open up that space so that we can get better elongation. We get better nerve transmission back to our brain. We can move a little bit better. If we can unlock our backs, our hips are going to move that much better. Our shoulders are going to work that much better. So that's where I think I understand ELDOA, but then they do have specific methods that you can use for different joints within your body too.
Sure.
I learned a lot of it from this book, Permanent Pain Cure by Ming Chu, I think is his name, but he preferences ELDOA within the book as well.
Great. We'll post that to the show notes as well. Second phase, or second in the three-step approach, load. And specifically, I love this idea of sequences and pairs. And then essentially to the contraction style here, eccentric and isometric. Could you go expand upon that to our listeners?
Yeah. So we're strength coaches, right? So we got to get stronger. We want to strengthen the fascia so we can tolerate more load. and ultimately improve the body's ability to produce force. And then the thing you got to understand is Davis's law that connective tissue is going to lay down lines of collagen and reinforcement along lines of stress through this process called mechanical transduction. I'm not going to get into that, but basically we need to load the fascial system to be able to handle a little bit more, to be able to produce more force, but also to be able to create more collagen so we can reinforce those lines of stress much more effectively. And those are the things that you start to see in pitchers, for example, right? Mm-hmm. You're going to start to see more collagen fibers around their anterior shoulder, around their posterior shoulder. Like I said before, like people with back pain, they're going to produce more collagen there so they can restrict movement. Those also optimize our slings. Those also optimize the ability to create whip. Maybe like in a hockey player, that's they're a slap shot.
Sure.
Right. They've been able to optimize that specific motor skill of shooting a puck, but maybe their fascial system has also been optimized so that it can inter and externally rotate more effectively about their hips to create a little bit more energy transfer or more efficient energy transfers about their chain. What else did you ask me about that?
No,
sorry.
In terms of measures of in terms of the sequences and pairs, and then you talked about eccentrics and isometrics in this load phase.
Yeah. So sequences and pairs is something I think I've gotten better at. I think just through experience too, is understanding how to sequence exercises together to improve the positions that you want to be able to get into. So for example, like one that I found to work really, really well is if you would improve somebody's overhead position or improve somebody's ability to get their arms over their head, is maybe not just doing chin-ups first, or a pull-up variation or a shoulder press, is to sequence exercises together that are going to effectively put you in the right position. So for example, we might do cross bench pullovers, then we'll do a Y, like maybe like an incline Y, then a push-up hold, and then we can go into those things.
Sure.
And the ability for them to get in the right positions is dramatic. It's pretty cool to see. We're also doing some direct anterior tib work or some calf work prior to squatting. So being able to sequence exercise a little bit more effectively, instead of just saying, all right, we're just going to push, pull, squat, and hinge. If we need to improve somebody's ability to get into those positions so we can effectively load them, let's create proper sequence within a warm-up, right? So they can help them get into those positions much more effectively, so then we can maximize our time doing those loads.
So true. So true.
And that's one thing that's probably changed the most within like warm-ups is maybe not just doing a straight structured dynamic warm-up all the time. Maybe we'll use strength-based exercises in a sequence to optimize the things that we're going to do that day. So if we're going to do an upper body day, maybe we might do that. Maybe we'll do pullovers. Maybe we'll do band dislocations. Maybe we'll do some iso Ys. If we're going to squat or do some lower body stuff, we're going to do some calf work, some anterior tib work, a barbell overhead squat, to optimize the position so that we can effectively load. I think that's probably the best way to do it. Optimize positions you can effectively load. And then using eccentrics and isometrics, I think just gives more time for the brain to sense and feel the positions that you want to reinforce, right? We talked about positions before. When you do things fast, that's not a lot of time for your brain to feel. And if your brain lacks the awareness to be able to get in those positions, you need to slow things down. That's just motor learning, right? When you learn a new skill, what are you going to do? You're going to go slow. You got to go slow so you understand how to sequence, how to feel. One thing I always say, and I think I said in the presentation, if you can't sense and feel, you can't control and change. Eccentrics and isometrics are pillars within our programming, especially early on for newcomers into the program, to enhance their ability to sense and feel. Because when you can sense and feel, then you have more awareness. If you have more awareness, then you can control and change.
Speaking of body position and isometrics and fascia, I'm guessing it's all interrelated, but it reminds me of the conversation that I've heard on several of the podcasts, Keith Barr talking about tendons, right? This idea of creep, right? We're holding these postures and positions, essentially the muscles contracting, and as time continues, the tendon slowly reduces stress, right? We get some tissue changes to the tendon. So if someone, for example, that's suffering as a hockey player might have a hip-related issue or constant hip pulls, we might have timed isometrics here to increase the pliability, if I hate that word, of the tissue at the myotendinous unit. From an isometric standpoint with your guys and girls, what's the time interval? I know Keith Barr said from a tendon standpoint, based on the newer research out, I think he cited, and I don't have it with me, 30-second holds. Is that typical for you guys, or are these smaller in time and duration? What's the set rep scheme for you guys?
Well, it depends, right? Because I think looking at Keith Barr's stuff, it's also like almost at 120% of max voluntary contraction too. So
Sure.
that's heavy, right? So heavy loads, and they're yielding isometrics, not necessarily overcoming isometrics. So for us, remember, it goes back to our philosophy. First thing is reduce chance of injury. I don't know if I quite feel comfortable having somebody with 120% load holding a certain position for fear that something else might give.
Sure.
If it was different, if I had a leg press machine, maybe if I had certain tools, if I had a Kaiser, right, where you can get somebody in the right position and just load them up with air pressure, I think that's a little bit different. So I think what you've got to be able to work with what you have. But when we start to implement isometrics, what we'll usually start with is 30 to 40 seconds worth of isometrics.
Great.
Total time per set, right? And what we try to do is accumulate close to 3 minutes of work in week one, right? And distribute it over sets. Because I found, I'm like, there might be times where you say, all right, here, we're going to do this for 2 or 3 minutes and see what you're made out of. Like, it obviously depends on the time of year when we do those types of things, but we do. And it might be more of a mental battle to do anything. But what I found is that more often than not, if we give them a little bit of rest interset, so say, for example, week one, we're going to do 4 reps with a 10-second ISO, right? That's your first set. Yep. If we do a dumbbell split squat hold, 4 reps with a 10-second hold on each side, that's for the first set. We're going to do 3 to 4 sets. That's how we're going to accumulate our volume. And then the next week, we're going to add a rep. So now instead of 40 seconds a rep, it's going to be 50 seconds. And week third, it's going to be 60 seconds a rep. So we're just accumulating more time over the course of a week.
Got it.
Oh, sorry, more time over the course of multiple sets, but then also week to week.
So we have fascial preparation. So that's our 3-step, the first step in the 3-step approach. Load, and now we're talking about the final step in our fascial preparation or our 3-step approach, which is explode. Could you expand upon that for us?
Yeah, and this is primarily where we're going to, and I think a lot of people do this well, is really trying to improve the elastic properties of our fascial system. Because ultimately, like for preparing athletes for sport, we got to be able to do things at a higher velocity. We got to be able to do things repeatedly, and we need to be able to do these types of things over and over and over again. And something that's important is our elastic energy is stored and released within our fascia very quickly, like I said, with that rubber band. And if force lasts longer than that, sometimes our plastic properties are going to kick in, and you're not going to be able to generate as much force. And that's something that we know through the stretch reflex. One thing I remember reading early in my days of reading some Charles Pollock, when he would talk about the length of a tempo. When we're prescribing a tempo, anything that's going to be 4 seconds, if you have an eccentric and an isometric combined of at least 4 seconds, you start to negate the stretch reflex, and it's going to be much more of an imposed muscular demand than it is an elastic or fascial demand. And so when we start to train our fascia, we want to make sure that we have a lot of rhythmic activities, a lot of things that minimize contact time or decrease our amortization phase as much as possible. So think of like, short cycling, quick repeating jumps, pogo jumps, jumping rope, high velocity sprinting, true plyometrics, not with a shorter response time, even a medium response time versus like a jumping and a sticking and landing. So those are the type of things that we're going to be able to impact our system. But like it's huge for what we do, because we talk about speed, and speed kills. Like we want to be able to play fast, and we want to be able to do those things fast, but also over and over and over again.
Absolutely. Fantastic explanation. And from a pragmatic standpoint, makes complete sense. Very detailed as well in the presentation. How do you prioritize or periodize, the model during the in-season or off-season? Is it just different days that you'll have a different target in a microcycle weekly? Or is it, hey, we've got a block of 4 weeks of this, and then we're going to move to this? How does that work?
Yeah, I'll talk about in-season right now because we're in it, right? Yep. We're in the middle of our season. So my philosophy of in-season approach is really to do the opposite of what happens within sport. Because again, like what is our goal and our philosophy? Number one, reduce chance of injury. So we got to try to keep them as healthy as possible. Sure. So we don't want to hit the same things that they're doing over and over again. So when I say do the opposite within a sport, and then we'll take hockey, for example, a lot of activities are going to be, it's going to be high volume. They're going to do a lot of repetitions of what they do. It's going to be low load, meaning that there's not a lot of external load. It's just their equipment. It's often done through a short amplitude. Like you're not going to put all your joints to a full range of motion. And so what we want to do is do the opposite of that. So we're going to do low volume work, higher loads, and focus on high amplitude or high range of motion work within our training. And that tends to be the key all season long because we want to keep them as healthy as possible. Now, we will surf the force velocity curve throughout the year based on where we are. I've never taken the approach of saying we want to maintain in season, because if you're average, why the hell would you want to maintain average? We want to be at our physical best at the end of the year, which is when you earn trophies. So we need to be able to be at our fastest and the most explosive at the end of the year. For that to happen, we cannot reduce and we cannot decrease our ability to produce force, because we know, and we've seen it, as our force decreases or our strength decreases, then our potential to be fast and explosive are also going to decrease as well. So we want to make sure that we continue to get stronger throughout the year, especially through our lower body. And it's got to be done in a systematic and really smart way that we don't kill them with extra volume where their legs are heavy and they can't perform, because then that's not going to work either. And I've been fortunate. We've got a really good system in place that allows our athletes to feel fresh, continues to help get them stronger. And where this happens nearly every single year, kids set PRs, guys and girls set PRs in their jumps near the end of the season, right going into playoffs.
That's great.
And then we'll also periodize our volumes based on opponents and travel schedules. Like, so we know we're coming off a road trip that's 7 hours away, and we're going to train on Monday. Monday's probably going to be a lower volume day versus if we just played a home weekend. So we try to take in those accounts. And also the college hockey season is unique too, because it's almost 2 seasons in one, like where you've got a chunk of 11 to 12 weeks based on whenever you start, 11 to 12 weeks of competing, 3 to 4 weeks of no competition, and then another 12 to 13 weeks of competing.
Sure.
So it's almost 2 seasons in one. And so the way we look at it is we will, near the end of the first half, we're going to start to build in a taper, and we'll start to reduce some volume and reduce some frequency so we can be at our best for those last couple weekends, because they're going to matter. And for us on our schedule, those were conference weekends, conference play. And then we'll do the same type. And then we'll use a 3 to 4 week. We treat it like a mini preseason where we build volume back up. And then we'll start to taper going back into when we start competing, build volume up, drop down, and then change accordingly. And then once we get to the off season, things are going to be different, right? So when we first start our postseason training phase, which I think is one of the most important phases of the year, you're rebuilding, right? You're rebuilding, you're reintroducing training back into their schedules and back into the routines, because ice gets taken up. And I tell them, like, listen, like, we have to build up our volume of handling training. Our volume at the end of the season is so low. So it could be like 2 25-minute workouts. That's what we're doing, but we need to build up our volume to be able to handle training 4 to 5 days a week. And so we start that, and we'll start training 4 or 5 days a week. And those sessions, honestly, are probably 30 to 40 minutes. Sure. And we're just going to slowly build up their tolerance to handling volume. Because the way I explain to them and educate them is like, listen, the goal of an off-season training is to increase your body's ability to tolerate stress. That's the goal of an off-season program. When you're in season, you have to perform activity for 6 days a week for 2 to 3 hours a day, which is stress, right? That's all it is that stress. Then you also have to build in, you have the stress of school, you have to build, maybe you have a financial stress, you've got the social stressors, all those types of things. I use training, that's my philosophy. I use training to build up their ability to handle and tolerate stress. And so the way we do that is we slowly, incrementally add more volume, because volume is that key indicator of overtraining or creating a stress response, not necessarily intensity. There's not a lot of people that like get overtrained from intensity. It's always volume related or under recovery, however you want to look at it. So we're going to slowly, incrementally be able to handle and increase their volume to the point where they're training hard 4 days a week, 5 days a week for up to 2 hours of volume. We want to be able to increase their body's ability to tolerate volume. And so I don't take a very minimalist based approach when it comes to the off season, because minimalism doesn't make sense to me. Sure. If we need to be able to get them to handle doing 12 to, like, when we play 2 games a week, our total workload is anywhere from 12 to 14 hours worth of work. If we're training for 4 hours a week, 4 hours a week is not preparing us to be able to handle 12 to 14 hours. Does that make sense?
Yeah, sure does.
Yeah. Yep, and so we want to make sure that we understand as they start to build up their volume of skating. Yeah, some of the dry land volume might start to back off, but we're slowly, incrementally building our total volume so that our work capacities are high enough to be able to handle the imposed demands.
I love it. That's an in-depth explanation if I've ever heard one. Thank you very much. No, seriously, in-season complement versus compete, and then off-season, it's a totally different beast, and we've got to build up the necessary volumes to sustain that energy for the next season. So well put with the detail. Wrapping up here, fascial health in terms of measures of your recommendations, aside from a good, well-rounded nutrition plan, and I say aside, we all know that can always be improved, lean protein, vegetables, etc. Anything that you recommend for your athletes in terms of supplements for fascial health? Anything that, hey, Anthony, we've really found this works, or is it just educating and continuing to hammer home the basics in terms and measures of good nutrition starting at the plate?
Yeah, it's pretty much really bare bones approach, because again, like the clientele that I work with is going to have financial restrictions to be able to not invest primarily into like supplements, and you can get things like hyaluronic acid or collagen. But like, honestly, what we're trying to work on is drinking enough water, right? Drinking enough water, salting your food, eating a minimally processed diet so that we're not creating extra inflammation with the processed foods that we're intaking into our body. Be getting more vegetables and more fruits. Like that's an issue with all of our athletes, is trying to get them to understand how getting more fruits and vegetables are going to provide them the vitamins, minerals that they need, but also to help balance out the breads and the proteins that they're doing too, like it's acids and bases, right? So from a chemistry standpoint, just try to make sure that we're getting enough bases into our body so they're not super inflammatory, that our body's not inflamed all the time. And then also habits in terms of sleep, right? And that's our number one way that we're going to be able to recover, is to making sure that we can build those habits. So I'm very much a behavioral modification type coach, is really trying to get them to understand
Absolutely.
the habits that they develop and the habits that they form are going to truly impact everything. So water is a big one, like making sure you carry around a water jug or water bottle with you all the time. Salt your foods. Try to choose organic, lean processed foods as much as you can, as your budget allows, but that's pretty much it.
Awesome.
Nothing too exotic from a supplement routine.
Our guest today has been Coach Brijesh Patel from Quinnipiac University. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks, Anthony. Appreciate it.